Hello, my soccer universe. My name is Roland and this is Football Talk. And I thought after this weekend with the Milan Derby and the Austrian Bundesliga regular season drawing to a close and the playoffs starting, I thought it's a good time to again look at where the European leagues are standing and also have a look in the 8 leagues that I'm covering. Where do we actually have a title race or where it's already decided? And where we have to look for side battles if you're interested in any of these leagues. And I'm planning to go in this video from most decided to least decided of them all, and maybe tell a few storylines along the way as well, because it makes it interesting. I also am planning to look a little bit into the cup competitions in these leagues as well, because those are always open and give some storylines as well. So yeah, I thought it will be a short update video just ahead of the big European roundup, round of 16, first leg recap that I'm planning to release on Friday. Europe's most decided title races, and I want to start here in the Eredivisie, where PSV enjoy a 19-point lead with 26 games played, meaning 8 rounds to go. I think Feyenoord will not really get in there. This is a decided title race, and very, very soon it will be over. Feyenoord will have to hang on now for the Champions League spot, but there it is Nijmegen actually, who are really in a good position. They are the surprise team of the year so far. They sit in third spot, just 3 points behind Feyenoord, and Feyenoord are having a rotten time overall. I don't know how long Van Persie will hang on. And then Twente and Ajax sitting behind with a Z, probably resigned already to a spot in the Conference League playoff. And then also relegation looks relatively decided, with Heracles going down, and then it's between Telstar and NAC Breda probably for those. Maybe Excelsior can be drawn in as well. But it's a very much a decided league, so we have to look at the cup competition. We've had a crazy semifinal a week ago, and it is a Z against Nijmegen. In the final, Nijmegen actually beating PSV, denying them the double. But it is also a chance for Z to overcome their trauma from last year, where they lost to the go-ahead Eagles. So they have 2 finals in a row. Will it be a surprise winner in Nijmegen, or will a Z prevail? Although Z is much less than Nijmegen this season. So I think this is where the excitement in the Eredivisie or in the Netherlands lies at. Equally decided is, of course, the Bundesliga. I mean, Bayern Munich, with 9 games to go, have an 11-point cushion ahead of Borussia Dortmund. Borussia Dortmund doing their best to mess it up whenever they can. Yes, they gave Bayern a hard battle, but when Bayern turned it on, Harry Kane just is on a different level. And so Bayern won, I think, twice now against Borussia Dortmund. They are one of the best teams in Europe at the moment, and top favorite for the Champions League as well. However, as with other leagues, Bayern is so much the class of this league that this might actually be their disadvantage in Europe, where, when you have to meet Premier League opposition, where it's always tight, they don't meet such a more difficult style of play. I also think that the race for the Champions League spots is quite interesting, with Hoffenheim being the surprise team. But Stuttgart and Leipzig also being very, very close behind. Leipzig having probably the inside track, and Leverkusen already having a 3-point deficit towards Stuttgart, but very much in the race. Leverkusen will play Stuttgart. Frankfurt will have to hope that the winner of the Pokal will actually make it into the European spots. Then they have a good shot, like Freiburg, who are still active in the Europa League, to get back into Europe. But those are the only teams that I could see going into Europe. Augsburg, Hamburg, who have made a rise, will probably not get implicated. I think it's again the bottom end where we have to look into Wolfsburg, big team in trouble, already a 4-point deficit to a relegation spot. Mainz is in there. Köln have been steadily falling. I'm a little bit worried about them. But yeah, Heidenheim is as good as down. And Wolfsburg, yes, they get now Dieter Hecking back after a big how to say, very ugly scenes in Wolfsburg at their home loss against Hamburg the past weekend. Hacking has brought them into the Champions League. We have to see where this will develop, but Wolfsburg is one of the bigger teams this season that might face relegation, but definitely not the biggest one. That will come a little bit later. If we look at the Pokal, that is not as far along as the others. We are at the semi-final stage. Stuttgart facing Freiburg in a derby and Leverkusen against Bayern Munich, with the games being played towards the end of April. So definitely an interesting one. I mean, the Stuttgart-Freiburg derby is definitely a good one. I would expect Leverkusen to give Bayern a little bit of trouble, but in the end Bayern to prevail, and it seems like Bayern is very much set on a double after they have not been winning the cup for a long time. Let's move to the tier of potential title races where the leagues look decided, but the leaders potentially could be shaky. And to me, Serie A is the next one in that one. Inter had a 10-point lead ahead of this weekend going into the derby against Milan. And you know, I'm a Milan fan, so I very much enjoyed that Milan continued their incredible streak against Inter. Now, 7 games in a row unbeaten, 5 wins in there, and for the first time since the 10-11 season, they do the double over Inter. However, they still have a 7-point deficit. Yes, the win was very convincing, and Inter's problem is they don't perform well against the big teams in the league. However, Milan's problem is, and that's why they're not really in a title race, or they have to address this if they want to get in any way back into the title race. Milan's problem is that they dropped so many points against lower teams. They lost at home to Cremonese and Parma. Cremonese, after a good start, is very likely to go down. Parma is at best mid-tier. They only got 1 point against Parma, a team that they should beat any day of the week, honestly. So this is where Milan's problem are at. They only have lost twice, but too many draws. This has been the undoing for Milan. And so even 7 points may be difficult to overcome and probably impossible. Inter having a rough schedule, but for instance, already the next game against Atalanta, Inter is not losing to Atalanta. Inter are getting the job done. Yes, it could get tight. And yes, injury problems for Inter are present, but Inter have been imperious. The last time they lost was the other Milan derby, and they have been winning, and only dropping points against Napoli at home. Inter have been really strong, and Milan in January and February had always a week where they dropped points in 2 games in a row, and this is the deficit. That's why I personally do not really think there's a title race, even though I would hope, and I'm trying to be hopeful about that. But then when I hear the comparisons that Inter have the tougher schedule than Milan, yeah, the problem is that Milan will drop points again against low opposition where they have no creativity in breaking down the opponents. Again, the derby, that was easy. Again, Allegri outplaying Inter, outmuscling them by just setting them up for a counterattack. Inter have no recipe against that at the moment. However, as long as Inter rack up the points at everything, or every team that is, let's say, below spot 7, and they have done this consistently, Inter are gonna win the title. So the most interesting race is, of course, for the Champions League spots, where Italy will most likely, well, in all likelihood, only have 4. And you see Como moved in there ahead of Roma now, because Roma lost at Genoa to De Rossi. So big storyline there. Juve for a while, I mean, they're playing well under Spalletti, but they also tend to drop too many points. And now it's a 3-way race for the last spot. Napoli seems safe despite injury troubles. They're getting the better players back. It is not inconceivable that Conte will get Napoli maybe even in a second place if Milan should falter again. So I think Inter, Milan, Napoli will play in the Champions League, but then it's the 4th spot between Como, Roma and Juve. And yes, we should mention that Roma have probably 2 ways into the Champions League under Gasperini, which is of course the League and the Europa League. But would you really count on Roma winning the Europa League? That is the big question. Next up, there is Bologna. I think Atalanta have the Champions League and the Coppa only. Other than that, there's really not much happening. Towards the end, yes, we still have Fiorentina there. They have been picking up a couple of wins, so they're not in the relegation zone anymore, but it's anything from safety. That has to be very, very clearly said. Fiorentina is not quite out of it, although I think they might be just good enough. I mean, the way Cremonese are trending, Pisa are trending, and even Verona have too much of a gap already. So I think Fiorentina just might survive by default. Lecce had a huge win over Cremonese on the weekend. That will also see them survive. And look at Torino again. Again, Torino can really not mount a challenge for Europe. In the Coppa, it's also an interesting affair where the second legs, the ones that will decide. I mean, it's all to play for. Como Inter was a boring 0-0 draw. Both teams decided, yeah, we'll play for it in April. And Lazio played a 2-2 against Atalanta. So I think it really looks like an Inter-Atalanta final. And Inter, again, are looking at least for a double. However, it's very much in their hands. And they have to prove that they will not falter like they did last season, where they had a chance of a historic treble and then could not deliver. The Premier League is slightly more open than Serie A due to the fact, yes, Arsenal also have a 7-point cushion, but they have a game more. So should City win the game in hand, then it is down to a 4-point cushion, which would open up everything. Still, Arsenal has a solid 95% chance of finally winning a Premier League title. However, Arsenal have slowly devolved into a team that is not very likable. From very likable Arsenal under the first title charge, like 2 or 3 seasons ago, slowly, they have really devolved into a very cynical team. Very un-Arsenal-like, at least if you grew up in the Wenger era. If you remember the George Graham era, this is Arsenal really reverting to boring Arsenal again. It's all about corner kicks, throw-ins, and out-muscling the opponent. It's not pretty to watch. I usually like to watch exciting teams. Arsenal is not exciting me one bit. However, I cannot deny them. It's the way, if it's not whistled dead, it's a way to actually get the points done. And at the moment, this is all that Arsenal can do. The interesting thing is that while City do not have it in their own hand anymore, yes, they could win the head-to-head against Arsenal, and then the gap is down, should they win the game in hand, to only a single point. But then Arsenal would need to drop points again, which is not unreasonable, but it's also not unreasonable to say that Manchester City are not going to drop points again. So it's in that sense very open, and that's why Arsenal, I think, still are in a very, very strong position. The Premier League, even though it's not shown yet, will in all likelihood get 5 Champions League spots. And at the moment, Manchester United seem to be a shoe-in. They're in a really good form. They're one of the teams that have beaten Arsenal. And so I would actually say, even though they're 11 points with Villa at the moment, that United looks strong. But then it's between Villa, Chelsea and Liverpool. And it's really hard to choose who will miss out. I have a feeling it will be Villa. Chelsea and Liverpool just have too much class, and Villa, while for a while they have been in a title race, honestly, not really. We have to see whether they can rebound from a really bad string of results. We also have to look, for instance, at a big club like Newcastle with all the backing, having a really torrid season, sitting mid-table. Crystal Palace now have stabilized, but they all look relatively safe. But then we have to look at the relegation battle. And while the math doesn't bear it out, Spurs look in serious danger. Yes, Wolves have been picking up points now, even against the big teams. I don't think they will make a comeback, but they're not the worst team in the Premier League ever. Burnley look like a team that is threatened also really by relegation, and I don't think they will really come back, especially the crazy game that they had on a previous weekend. Where they played against Brentford, 3-0 down, come back to 3-3 and then lose it 4-3 because a goal is denied late on. Burnley are down, but West Ham show some solidity. They're only 1 point behind Spurs. Forest similarly, and Spurs seems to be the one team that doesn't know how to handle this pressure. I will not be surprised for Spurs to go down. They would be the biggest team this season to go down if they would. They would probably in all history be the richest club to ever get relegated. Not the most shocking one, but definitely the richest one. And it's an absolute cluster F. And I think they even hired now the wrong coach. I mean, Tudor can get you, how to say, Tudor is able to stabilize a team if the team responds to his rather strict methods, which are very much the Italian way, and I don't think the Spurs players are really responding to that. I think that many Spurs players are not even aware that they're in a relegation battle. That's how bad it is, and I really feel it's not looking pretty at all for Spurs. So yeah, I think in North London, this could be an epic season for Arsenal. Should Arsenal win the Premier League and Spurs get relegated, on the other side, you lose your biggest rival, which is never good. I also said Arsenal and Manchester City are not only fighting for a title, they also are playing each other in the League Cup final very, very soon on this weekend. So there's a head-to-head. And they're also alive in the FA Cup, where we actually had a couple of upsets. I actually really enjoyed Wrexham against Chelsea in round 5. Chelsea barely getting through, but basically on their strength. They now play Port Vale. Arsenal have to go to Southampton, and City face Liverpool. A Liverpool team that I didn't pay much attention to now, as I'm watching them play against Galatasaray, already 1-0 down. This Liverpool team might scrape into the Champions League just about, but is not convincing. So I would say City will go through. And unless they get drawn in the semifinals, it looks like City and Arsenal could meet a third time or have a third title. And then they're also very well alive in the Champions League as well. But yeah, Premier League maybe could get this exciting, but we have to see. Now let's go into the leagues where the title seems like decided either by the status of the teams that are involved or by the points gap, but where we could have a title race. I want to start in Liga. It's of the top leagues the tightest one. There's only a single point between PSG and Lens. However, my model, thanks to PSG being so dominant, says there's a 96% chance for PSG winning the title. So is it tight, or is it just that PSG have been rather flat? If PSG can get it together, of course they will run away with it, but Lens have been the best team in France so far. They are really giving PSG a run for the money. I think it will probably come down to the head-to-head and also how PSG will focus on Europe or not. OM for a while seemed to be in there. Lyon also seemed like to get their act together, but they were all faltering as of late. So it's really wide open. Monaco is now a team that has given 3 times in a row PSG a real run for the money. Almost eliminating them from the Champions League, but also handing them now a hammer blow, because PSG had a 4-point lead ahead of the past weekend. So really, really exciting stuff. It's also for the European spot. It's relatively wide open, and it's not unlikely that someone will miss out. On the bottom though, Nantes. Ooh, big name in big trouble. Metz coming up, going down again, and Auxerre seem to be going into the relegation. Also in the Coupe de France, it's again a wide open competition. As the Coupe de France often is, we have a semi-final of Lens, who could actually get a double against Toulouse and Strasbourg, a team that is doing so-and-so in the league, probably will not make it back to Europe unless they win, of course, the Conference League, playing against Nice. So a really good semi-final, I have to say, with probably a surprise winner. And again, OM not winning the Coupe de France once more. And that is also a shame for them. Going to La Liga, where we probably have the most exciting team to play at the moment, which is Barcelona, especially when you watch Lamine Yamal hitting it into the next gear and deciding games by himself. I think in the last 2 weeks he has just simply been irresistible. I still worry about this Barcelona team on the back, and I guess they will probably come undone should they meet some more formidable opposition, something they will not meet in La Liga. except in the Copa, where Atletico took them apart in the Copa del Rey semifinal. Maybe let's start in the Copa del Rey here, where 4-0 first leg, and then Barca tried their best to come back. Atletico tried their best to waste that one, but it ended with a 3-0. But the chances were there for Barcelona to take it at least in the overtime. Atletico Madrid are finally back in the Copa del Rey final, where they meet Real Sociedad. I think it's a really good final. The two teams also met on the past weekend. A really exciting 3-2 game. But going back to Barcelona, Real Madrid, I think what Barcelona, they are far and away the best team in La Liga, but it's only a 4-point gap to Real Madrid, with a Clásico still to play. Yes, it will be played in Barcelona, but that Real Madrid do not have a bigger gap. This is the one thing that Barcelona has to worry about. Yes, Barcelona dropped a couple of games here and there, but it also is true, and I said it last time, that La Liga is unfortunately too weak. That again, it's the big three teams that will be on top. And that is not a good sign for La Liga, that even a Real Madrid team that is anything but convincing, a team that is not working well, that just relies on their superstars, will easily finish in second place. At least. But let's see. If there is a Clásico where Real Madrid win, the race could be on again, but it seems very much like Barcelona's to lose. In the relegation zone, it's also a rather tight battle. We have Levante and Real Oviedo pretty much down already, but then Mallorca, Elche, Alaves for the last spot. That could also be a really, really tight one. We have also a relatively tight league in Portugal, where it's only 4 points also between Porto and Sporting. Our model says it's only 6-7% chance for Porto to win it, but I think this is deceiving, because all the matches between the big three have been played. They were all draws except for Porto beating Sporting once. So the only way for Porto to give this up is that they have to slip up against the smaller opponents, which is something they have not really done except for once. So therefore, I think it's a very comfortable position that Porto themselves sit in. And yes, they have only one difficult match left, which is away to Braga. But then Sporting hosts Benfica. We had a big weekend on the past weekend where Sporting conceded a late equalizer in Braga to only play a 2-2 draw, or at home to Braga. And Porto had a 2-0 lead against Benfica, where Benfica fought back. The crazy thing is that Benfica are more or less out of the title race with a 7-point deficit, but they have not lost yet. Again, too many draws, a little bit like Milan. Braga will finish best of the rest, but Benfica will probably play in the Europa League next season. The interesting part is also that in the Taça de Portugal, Sporting have actually beaten Porto, so they could win. But there's a return leg still to be played. They will play against lower league opposition in the final. So it's pretty much who wins that duel that will win the Taça. And yeah, at the moment it seems like advantage Sporting. However, one could see Porto maybe mounting a comeback under Faraoli. And so we come to the tightest league that I'm not only covering, but probably also in Europe, the Austrian Bundesliga. The regular season ended, and it's Sturm Graz winning on the last match day because Rapid just snuck in, beating Salzburg a little bit out of nowhere. 3 weeks ago, it seemed like Rapid might be missing out, and Salzburg is imperious suddenly again, and then everything went any other way. This league is so open. After the regular season, we have Sturm in 38, Salzburg and Mailask in 37, Austria Vienna at 36, and then Rapid and Hartberg at 33. But the kicker is now points are getting halved, and suddenly all the teams are within 3 points. This is basically their all-starting level, and this is absolute madness, I have to say. It is really wide open. And based on form, even though Lask had now a little blip of 3 games not winning, but they have been overall the most consistent team if there wouldn't be the 1-5 home loss to Salzburg. By pure talent, Salzburg should still be considered the favorites. Sturm Graz are in a transition phase, but they bring in some really good players. Austria Vienna are outperforming their own potential quite a lot. They play actually quite dangerously. Lask have been under Didi Kübauer after a horrid start, the best team in the league. Actually, if you would only count the games by Coach Kübauer, he would be far and away the leader in the league. And Hartberg have not lost in ages either. And then there's Rapid, who had the best start ever to a season, then proceeded to not win for, I think, 11 or 12 games in a row, which never has happened in his history, scraping into the championship round, but still very much into it. It's an absolutely crazy league. Now, again, I'm saying this now neutral. Now let me go into fan mode. LASK, I'm not saying they will win the championship, but they have been really, really steady. The chances of getting silverware this season are probably as big as ever, and this would be the first silverware since 1965. Because in the cup, you're also in the semi-final, one that had to be postponed due to fog. You play at a local rival, Reed, the team that hates you most. So this is not an easy game. But should you win this game, and by pure quality, you should, even though a month ago you played in Ried and you needed a last-minute penalty to not lose your first game under the new coach, but it was a game that you also dominated. So I have to say this was not an unfair game. Should you win this game, you play in the final against Altach. An Altach team that has been really solid, that almost made it into the championship round, but they beat Salzburg away from home in the semi-final. So I'm not saying it's a walkover by any means. But given that Altach is the opponent in the final for LASK, this is the biggest chance of winning a title. And that is something I did not expect at the beginning of the season. I've always been hoping that we for once might win a title, but the way it ran, pretty impressive stuff. So yeah, this was a little bit longer run through than I expected, but this is where Europe's leagues are at. I think we have potentially a title race in France, potentially a title race in the Premier League and Serie A. La Liga and Liga Portugal seem like they're open, could open up, but I actually think we already know where it's going. But the one league where it's really super open is the Austrian Bundesliga. Let me know if you agree with my assessment of these leagues and which leagues are you following most closely. Will any of the teams that are not currently in first have an upset? Will we see somewhere a surprise title race or a title winner? That is my question to you. But in any case, hope you enjoyed this little audio episode. If you watch this on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up for that one. If you're listening this on your favorite podcast app, please leave me a comment and also a review. Any case, tell somebody else that football talk for my soccer universe does exist, and I will talk to you soon with more things in my soccer universe. Bye.